what we actually looked at was the major difference between individuality and individualism. Individualism is opposed to what marriage offers. It's opposed to exclusiveness, which is what marriage is ought to be, and it excludes also stability and committed relationship, because the main point of reference for an individualistic cultural ideal is the self, and then pursuing intimate relationship as a reward to self. So that was what we basically looked at last week. Today we have two questions that we did not respond to last week. The first question is, what are the signs of a good balance in a marriage, of supporting personal or individual growth or interest without going down the road of individualism? The second question is, do you think that poor communication skills are affecting conflict resolution as they focused just on individuality instead of marriage or couple's goal? If so, how do you counteract that? I will put the two questions together because they connect to each other. And I'll begin by responding to the questions by saying that to strike a balance and to know how to communicate is dependent on three basic areas of questions. The first question will be, who am I? The second question will be, what am I for? And then the third question will be, who am I for? The individualistic culture will begin to say, who am I? I'm just a person who seeks absolute freedom. And then what am I for will be my ultimate satisfaction. That's what the individualistic culture will preach. And then the third will be, who am I for? Who am I for is just for myself, since any intimate relationship is a reward to self. So there's nothing outside self. Even if they are in a relationship, it's just to fulfill the self. But to counteract that and to strike the balance is to have a concrete, objective answers to these three questions. We are image and likeness of God. That's who we are. And that ought to inform our attitude to self in relation to another. Because if we understand the self to be image and likeness of God, and the other person, the other individual is an image and the likeness of God, then we come with respect, love, and upholding of the dignity of that person in whatever way we can. And then what am I for? We are for the glory of God. That's what we are for. And then who am I for? We are for God. And who is God? God is community and relationship. And if we cannot communicate that in words and action, then something is missing. It means that we have not been able to strike the balance between self-growth and individualism. So I hope this will help in that question. If there are more questions from this, you can send it. We'll respond to that at the end of this discussion. So today we're speaking on in search of diversity, what lies ahead of marriage. And I will define diversity in the context in which we are speaking to be the consciousness of being different without ignoring the difference of the other, but aligning in love to flourish in that difference. So you acknowledge, you're conscious that you're different from the other person, but you do not ignore the other person or force the other person to acknowledge your difference, but you align because you align in love so that that difference can flourish. So diversity comes from the fact of being distinct in quality and makeup. And there are two dimensions of diversity. There is primary diversity and there is secondary diversity. Primary diversity arises from characteristics that people cannot change. The society can propose alternatives to the change, but it is artificial, it's not natural. And those characteristics that we cannot change is the gender, the biological gender, that you are either a man or a woman, and that is built in that difference. The society is pushing alternatives that confuses physiological and psychological, that you feel and then you think you are not or you are. And that's one of the primary characteristics or the dimensions of diversity. Another one is race. It's either you are African, you are race, you cannot change it and you cannot deny it. If you try to change it, we get to the point of of identity crisis. Another one is ethnicity, which is related to race. Another one is age, physical abilities, which can dwindle over time, yes, but there are basic physical abilities that that goes back to the first, to the gender that we are created. A woman is created to give birth. However, we want to twist it. That is abuse of diversity and the abuse of the beauty in difference. So and then qualities, sexual orientation, those are basic primary characteristics or dimensions of diversity. The secondary diversity arises from characteristics that can be changed, like people's class. You can move up in status, religion, nationality, place of residence, educational background, marital status, positions in life. These are the basic dimensions of diversity, primary and secondary. So we see that American worldview is in a way guided not just by these two dimensions, but by two cultural influences, religion and law, that the worldview is characterized by religion and the law. So we see marriage is understood and practiced within these influences. The National Directory for Catechesis, page 29, talks about the United States enjoy a rich community life that has been sustained by an emphasis on pluralism and individual freedom. That's how much rich this nation is dependent on that diversity and the individual freedom. So we see that both religiously and culturally differs from the diversity experienced in the past. And that's why the diversity, people understand the differences, but they don't know how to respond to the dynamism that comes with that differences. Because culture is dynamic and people evolve. And because they evolve, the diversity become complex. And if not well responded, it becomes a challenge instead of a strength or beauty itself. For instance, in the past, when the Polish immigrants, when they arrived, they stayed in a community. The Irish gathered together and supported each other within that community. Today, the nation is so diverse that people identify themselves as Irish, Polish, Hispanic, but with little or no cultural consciousness. So you see people who claim, oh, I'm Irish, but they have no clear consciousness of what that entails. So it becomes a challenge when the eternal subconscious reality or consciousness of that diversity begins to emerge, then they become tensed or anxious about how to respond to that diversity that ought to be a strength. So this kind of diversity empowers how marriage is understood and how married relationship is lived. Because in the past, if you remember the history, or if you can ask those who are older, will understand that you live within a community. You attend the same church, you attend the same grocery store, you attend the same school. And then when you marry someone probably you've seen in the church. And then the community even understand and knows you that your marriage and the success is dependent in some way by the bond and the support of that community. So it becomes a difficult and a challenging thing in this time that we'll see people who now look within themselves for the sources of their union. And then people become spectators because there is no cultural or consciousness of the diversity because of the movement that have happened over time and the things that have changed. Another reason that contributes to diversity is that people move around for economic reasons, and when they move, they lose something of themselves and their cultural and religious consciousness. So kids and children are raised within that community and that kind of worldview. Andrew Shalin, in his book Marriage Go Round that I quoted last week, remarks that moving is also a way for young adults to avoid parental supervision. All these make Americans appear restless, and all these can affect family stability. As they move, they want independence, but they are not ready for what comes with that independence. So they look within themselves to begin to form defense mechanisms and the escape route to help them survive in the tension that comes in the differences that they experience. So these realities show how cultural and religious diversity in the US impacts marriage as an institution and how people respond to the church's teaching on marriage as a permanent union. Because each culture is different, and the culture and the difference in the cultures imparts people's understandings of relationship. That diversity imparts that. There is this book called Counseling African American Marriages and Families. Page 1 talks about the struggle of role play in relationship and marriage among the African American population, which play out in other cultures. But Edward Wembley says, while it appears to me that there are deeper marital and family dynamics at work in these families and marriages than the religious values that are articulated, the fact is that some marriages and families organize their conflict around religious values. That certain families organize their conflict around religious values. And this is the same is true for other cultures. Some cultures have religion embedded in their cultural ideals, while in other culture and religion, in other cultures, culture and religion are independent. So it is easier for some to bring their individual preferences or ideals under the scrutiny of religion, while for others it is so difficult. For them, they do not see any need to bring any religious value or ideal to their personal life. They just want that separation. And that imparts how marriage as a sacrament and as a permanent union is embraced, lived, and accepted. So you see that these realities impact marriage today, and that has increased the rate of divorce and cohabitation. It has increased other forms and series of relationship. So the consequences of the diversity of culture and religion in America is what Andrew Chalin calls American religion. He continued, he says, in its focus on both marriage and self-development, tends to encourage marriage. This American religion, in seeking marriage and self-development, encourage marriage, but promote an individualistic mode of thinking about personal life. Then it tolerates divorce and accept even multiple relationships. It also encourages cohabitating couples to end their relationship within few years if they are unwilling to marry. And I will add, if they no longer find fulfillment or satisfaction, they can move to another relationship. So you see that this kind of change of diversity pose a challenge to marriage as a permanent union that is committed relationship, exclusive, and for life. If you can move on, marriage is encouraged, but you can move on when your happiness is no longer guaranteed. So the teaching on sacramental marriage therefore stand in opposition with such culture that claims to be religious, yet interpret spiritual mysteries such as marriage on their own terms. So cultural and religious diversity confronts the church with the need to redefine marriage, or what still allow the society to define marriage for everyone. So that's what the society is actually seeking, because it has pushed religion backwards, that is even asking the religion to let them define how marriage ought to be. And that is just a serious challenge, and that cannot be allowed. So cohabitation and divorce are symptoms of the crisis that is caused by the tension as a result of this diversity that challenge who we are as religious and social beings. And in some cases, as Amoris Laetitia remarks, the choice of a civil marriage, or in many cases of simple cohabitation, is often not motivated by prejudice or resistance to a sacramental union, but by cultural or contingent situations. So that's why you see some people, they still struggle because they know that marriage is a noble institution, but they can't let themselves embrace the required essentials of that marriage and what that entails in their personal life. They become so afraid to lose themselves that they push it aside. So still, people still hold marriage to be ideal, but because of some situations that confront them and not understanding what to do, they settle for civil marriage or one form of partnership or the other. So you see that it is a real challenge in our time. Diversity in itself is a strength, But misunderstanding and not realizing the dynamism in culture and how we need to be proactive in our response to it becomes a challenge to marriage as an institution and as a sacrament. So I will just stop here.